When my son-in-law Marcus handed me that small recording device and said, "Linda, I think you should know what your daughter really says about you when you're not around," I took it with trembling hands. What I heard on that recording broke my heart into pieces. But what Marcus didn't know was that I'd been documenting his own secrets for months, and I was about to use everything I discovered to protect my daughter in ways he never saw coming. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Linda Chen, and I'm 58 years old. I've lived in Sacramento, California my entire adult life, working as a registered nurse for over 30 years before retiring last year. My husband, David, passed away from cancer 3 years ago, leaving me alone in our modest two-bedroom home in the Pocket neighborhood. What happened with my daughter, Sarah, and her husband, Marcus, taught me that sometimes the people closest to you are the ones plotting against you, and sometimes protecting the ones you love means becoming someone you never thought you'd have to be. The story really begins 2 years ago when Sarah married Marcus Wellington. From the outside, Marcus seemed like everything a mother could want for her daughter. He was handsome, charming, and worked as a financial advisor at a prestigious firm downtown. He drove a BMW, wore expensive suits, and treated Sarah like a princess during their courtship. Sarah was absolutely smitten with him. And honestly, so was I at first. Marcus came from what he called old Sacramento money. His family owns several commercial properties around the city, and he never hesitated to mention his connections or his expensive tastes. When he proposed to Sarah with a 3-carat diamond ring, I thought my daughter had found her fairy tale ending. Sarah had struggled through a difficult divorce from her first husband when she was just 25, and watching her fall in love again filled my heart with joy. The wedding was everything Sarah had dreamed of. Marcus insisted on having it at the Citizen Hotel downtown with over 200 guests and no expense spared. He paid for everything from Sarah's custom designer dress to the elaborate floral arrangements that cost more than I used to make in a month as a nurse. During his wedding speech, Marcus talked about how much he loved Sarah and how excited he was to become part of our family. He even mentioned how much he looked forward to having me as his mother-in-law, joking that he'd always wanted a nurse in the family. After the wedding, Sarah and Marcus moved into a beautiful house in East Sacramento, one of those restored Victorian homes that cost well over $1 million. Marcus said it was a wedding gift from his parents, and Sarah was overwhelmed with gratitude. She'd gone from living in a small apartment after her divorce to being the wife of a successful financial advisor with a gorgeous home and unlimited spending money. For the first year of their marriage, everything seemed perfect. Sarah would call me every few days, bubbling with excitement about their latest vacation or the expensive furniture Marcus had surprised her with. She'd never lived this kind of lifestyle before, and I could hear the happiness in her voice. Marcus was attentive and generous, always bringing Sarah flowers or jewelry, taking her to expensive restaurants and planning elaborate weekend getaways. But gradually, I started noticing small changes in Sarah's behavior when I visited their home. She seemed more subdued when Marcus was around, quicker to defer to his opinions, more careful about what she said. When I'd comment on their beautiful home or ask about their plans, Sarah would glance at Marcus before answering, as if seeking his approval for her words. Marcus, meanwhile, became increasingly comfortable treating me like part of the furniture. During family dinners, he'd dominate conversations with stories about his business success or his family's achievements. He'd interrupt Sarah when she tried to speak, correct her when she got details wrong about his work, and generally treat her like a beautiful accessory rather than an equal partner. The first real warning sign came about 18 months into their marriage during one of my regular Sunday visits. I'd been coming over every other week to have dinner with them, and Marcus had always been polite and welcoming. But this particular Sunday when I arrived, Marcus answered the door with an expression I'd never seen before. "Linda, we need to talk," he said, not inviting me inside immediately like he usually did. "Sarah's been having some issues lately, and I think your visits might be contributing to the problem." I was confused and concerned. What kind of issues? Is Sarah okay? Marcus stepped outside and closed the door behind him, leaving Sarah inside. She's been questioning a lot of our decisions lately, getting upset about things that shouldn't matter. I think she's been talking to you about our personal business, and maybe you're giving her ideas that aren't helpful for our marriage." That conversation left me deeply unsettled. When I finally got inside to see Sarah, she seemed nervous and kept apologizing for Marcus being protective of their marriage. She assured me that everything was fine and that Marcus was just stressed about work, but I could see something had changed in her demeanor. Over the next few months, my visits became less frequent and more structured. Marcus would often find reasons to be present during our conversations, steering the discussion towards safe topics like my garden or his latest business achievements. Sarah became quieter during these visits, contributing less to conversations and seeming almost afraid to express opinions that might contradict Marcus. The second major warning sign came about 18 months into their marriage, during Sarah's birthday dinner. Marcus had planned an elaborate celebration at an upscale restaurant, inviting several of his colleagues and their wives. Throughout the evening, I watched Marcus interact with the other women at the table, and what I saw made my stomach turn.
He was flirtatious in a way that went far beyond normal social interaction. He complimented the women on their appearances, touched their shoulders when he leaned in to speak to them, and maintained eye contact that lasted too long. When one of his colleagues' wives excused herself to go to the restroom, Marcus's eyes followed her across the restaurant in a way that made me deeply uncomfortable. But what disturbed me most was Sarah's reaction. She noticed his behavior too. I could tell by the way her smile became forced and her conversation became stilted. But she didn't say anything. She just sat there, making polite conversation and pretending everything was normal, while her husband openly flirted with other women at her own birthday dinner. After that evening, I started paying closer attention to Marcus's behavior and Sarah's responses. During family gatherings, I noticed that Marcus would often disappear for long periods, claiming he was taking important business calls. He'd return with explanations about urgent client needs or investment opportunities that required his immediate attention, even during holidays and weekends. Sarah had started making excuses for his absences that seemed rehearsed, as if she'd been coached on what to say. "Marcus works so hard for us," she'd tell me. "His clients really depend on him. He's building our future." But I could see the hurt in her eyes when he'd leave her alone at family events to handle his urgent business calls. The breaking point came 10 months ago, during what should have been a pleasant Saturday afternoon visit. I'd arrived at their house around 2 in the afternoon, expecting to spend a few hours with Sarah while Marcus was allegedly at the office, catching up on paperwork. But when I knocked on the door, no one answered, despite Sarah's car being in the driveway. I used the spare key Sarah had given me for emergencies and let myself in, calling out to announce my presence. The house was quiet, but I could hear voices coming from upstairs. As I climbed the staircase to find Sarah, the voices became clearer, and what I heard stopped me in my tracks. It was Sarah on the phone, and she was crying. "I don't know what to do anymore, Mom. He says I'm paranoid, but I know something's going on. He's always on his phone, always working late, always traveling for business. And the way he looks at other women," her voice broke, "I feel like I'm losing my mind." I realized she was talking to Marcus's mother, not me. I'd never heard Sarah sound so defeated, so desperate. She continued, "He told me that if I keep questioning him, he'll start recording our conversations to prove how irrational I'm being. He says my mother is filling my head with suspicious thoughts, that I was never like this before she started interfering in our marriage." My blood ran cold. Marcus was not only manipulating Sarah, but he was blaming me for her growing awareness of his behavior. Worse, he was threatening to record their private conversations to use against her. I quietly retreated downstairs and left the house, my mind racing with anger and concern for my daughter. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Sarah's broken voice, about Marcus's threats to record her, about the pattern of control and manipulation I was witnessing. As a nurse, I'd seen domestic abuse in various forms, and I recognized the signs of emotional manipulation and gaslighting that Marcus was using against Sarah. But I also realized that I was in a difficult position. Sarah wasn't ready to admit that her marriage was problematic, and if I pushed too hard, Marcus would likely succeed in turning her against me completely. I needed to be strategic about how I approached this situation, and I needed evidence of Marcus's true character before I could hope to help Sarah see the truth. That's when I made a decision that would change everything. If Marcus was going to threaten to record Sarah to prove she was irrational, then I was going to start recording Marcus to prove he was the one who couldn't be trusted. I knew it was morally questionable, but I also knew that my daughter's emotional well-being was at stake, and I wasn't going to stand by and watch her be destroyed by a manipulative husband. The next week, I bought a small digital recording device online, the kind private investigators use for surveillance work. It was tiny, easily concealed, and had excellent audio quality. I also researched the legality of recording conversations in California and learned that as long as one party to the conversation consents, the recording is legal. Since I would be present for any conversations I recorded, I would be that consenting party. My plan was simple. I would document Marcus's behavior during family gatherings and social events, capturing evidence of his manipulation tactics, his inappropriate interactions with other women, and his treatment of Sarah. I hoped that eventually I would have enough evidence to help Sarah see the truth was really happening in her marriage. The first recording I made was during a family barbecue at their house 3 weeks later. I'd hidden the device in my purse and positioned myself near Marcus throughout the afternoon. What I captured was even worse than I'd expected. When Sarah went inside to get more drinks, Marcus immediately started complaining about her to his brother, who was visiting from Los Angeles. "She's been so clingy lately, always wanting to know where I am, who I'm with, what I'm doing. It's exhausting."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Her mother has been filling her head with paranoid thoughts, and now Sarah questions everything I do. His brother laughed. "Marriage will do that to them. They all get possessive eventually." "The thing is," Marcus continued, "I married Sarah because she was easygoing and trusting. She didn't ask a lot of questions, didn't demand constant attention, but now she's becoming like every other wife, suspicious and needy. Sometimes I wonder if I made a mistake." I felt sick listening to him talk about my daughter like she was a possession that had stopped functioning properly. But the recording got worse. "I've been thinking about getting some insurance," Marcus said cryptically. "What kind of insurance?" his brother asked. "The kind that protects you when your wife starts making accusations. I'm thinking about recording some of our conversations, just in case she ever tries to claim I said or did things I didn't do. Women can be vindictive during divorces, and I need to protect my assets." "You thinking about divorce already?" His brother sounded surprised. "Let's just say I'm thinking about my options. Sarah came with nothing, and she'll leave with nothing if I have anything to say about it. But I need to be smart about how I handle things. Document everything, control the narrative, make sure any problems look like they're coming from her side, not mine." I stopped the recording there, my hands shaking with rage and fear for Sarah. Marcus wasn't just manipulating her emotions, he was actively planning to destroy her reputation and leave her with nothing if their marriage ended. And he was already setting me up as the villain in his narrative, blaming me for Sarah's growing awareness of his true character. But the recording also gave me hope, because it proved that I wasn't imagining the problems in their marriage. Marcus was exactly the manipulative, calculating person I suspected him to be, and now I had evidence of his true intentions. Over the next several months, I continued documenting Marcus's behavior whenever I had the opportunity. I recorded conversations at family dinners, holiday gatherings, and social events. The pattern that emerged was consistent and disturbing. Marcus would openly flirt with other women when he thought Sarah wasn't paying attention, making inappropriate comments about their appearances, and finding excuses to touch them casually. He would disappear for long phone calls that he claimed were business-related, but I noticed that these calls often coincided with text messages that made him smile in ways that seemed decidedly personal rather than professional.
He would undermine Sarah's confidence by correcting her in front of others, dismissing her opinions as uninformed, and making subtle jokes about her intelligence or judgment. When Sarah would try to defend herself or express hurt feelings, Marcus would accuse her of being too sensitive or overreacting, a classic gaslighting technique. Most disturbingly, he would often speak about Sarah to others as if she weren't present, discussing her behavior, her emotional state, and her relationship with me as if she were a problem to be managed rather than a partner to be respected. The recordings painted a clear picture of a man who saw his wife as an accessory to his successful image rather than as an equal partner in their marriage. Marcus enjoyed the status that came with having a beautiful, devoted wife, but he had no interest in the actual work of building a healthy relationship with Sarah. As I gathered this evidence, I also started noticing changes in Sarah that worried me deeply. She lost weight, seemed constantly anxious, and had developed a nervous habit of checking her phone obsessively, as if she were monitoring Marcus's communications. When I'd ask her about her marriage during our increasingly rare visits, she'd give me responses that sounded scripted, praising Marcus's success and their wonderful life together, while her eyes told a completely different story. The most heartbreaking recording I made was during their second wedding anniversary dinner, which they celebrated at the same restaurant where Marcus had flirted so openly during Sarah's birthday. I'd been invited to join them, ostensibly to celebrate their happy marriage, but what I witnessed was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. Throughout the dinner, Marcus made seemingly loving comments about their relationship that were actually designed to reinforce his control over Sarah. "Sarah's so lucky to have found someone who can provide for her the way I do," he said to the waiter, as if Sarah weren't sitting right there. She'd never experienced this kind of lifestyle before we met. When Sarah tried to contribute to the conversation by mentioning a promotion opportunity at her job, Marcus immediately dismissed it. "Sarah doesn't need to work," he told me. "I make more than enough to support us both. Besides, her job is just a little administrative position at a medical office. It's not like it's a real career." I watched Sarah's face fall as Marcus diminished her professional achievements and aspirations. She'd worked hard to build a career in medical administration after her first divorce, and I knew she took pride in her work. But Marcus's comment made it clear that he saw her job as insignificant compared to his financial success. The evening got worse when Marcus excused himself to take what he claimed was an urgent business call, leaving Sarah and me alone at the table. Sarah immediately apologized for his behavior, making excuses for his dismissive comments and his constant phone interruptions. "He's under a lot of pressure at work," she said, but I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. "He's just trying to build our future together." When Marcus returned from his call, he was in an unusually good mood, smiling and laughing in a way that seemed disconnected from the business emergency he'd claimed to be handling. The call had lasted over 20 minutes, far longer than any urgent client consultation should have taken. As we left the restaurant, I noticed Marcus checking his phone and smiling at a message that had come in during dinner. When Sarah asked if everything was okay with his client, Marcus snapped at her with sudden irritation.
You don't need to monitor my business communications, Sarah. I'm perfectly capable of handling my own work without your supervision. The shift in his mood was so dramatic and unprovoked that I knew something else was going on. Business calls don't typically leave people grinning at their phones like teenagers with crushes, and Marcus's defensive reaction to Sarah's innocent question confirmed my growing suspicions about the true nature of his frequent communications. That night, I went home and listened to the recording of their anniversary dinner with a heavy heart. The contrast between Marcus's public persona as a loving husband and his actual treatment of Sarah was stark and disturbing. He was systematically undermining her confidence, isolating her from her support systems, and conditioning her to accept his dismissive and controlling behavior as normal. But I also realized that my recordings, while valuable for documenting the pattern of emotional abuse, weren't going to be enough to help Sarah see the truth about her marriage. Marcus was too skilled at gaslighting, too careful about maintaining his public image, and too successful at making Sarah doubt her own perceptions. I needed something more concrete, something that would undeniably prove Marcus's deception and force Sarah to confront the reality of who she'd married.
And I had a growing suspicion that Marcus's frequent business calls and mysterious text messages might provide exactly the evidence I needed. That's when I decided to expand my surveillance efforts beyond recording conversations. If Marcus was having an affair, which seemed increasingly likely based on his behavior patterns, I needed to document it. Not because I wanted to destroy his life, but because I wanted to save Sarah's life before he destroyed her completely. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. 3 weeks after their anniversary dinner, Sarah called me in tears, asking if she could stay at my house for a few days. Marcus had to travel to Los Angeles for an important client presentation, she explained, and she was feeling lonely and anxious about being alone in their big house. Of course, I welcomed Sarah to stay with me, but her request struck me as odd. She'd never been afraid to be alone before, and Marcus's business trips were routine occurrences that hadn't bothered her in the past. When she arrived at my house with a small suitcase, she looked exhausted and defeated in a way that broke my heart. "I don't know what's wrong with me lately," Sarah confessed as we sat in my kitchen drinking tea. "I just feel so anxious all the time, like something's not right, but I can't put my finger on what it is. Marcus says I'm being paranoid, that the stress of adjusting to married life is making me imagine problems that don't exist." I listened to my daughter describe her growing sense of unease about her marriage, and I realized that her instincts were telling her the truth that her conscious mind wasn't ready to accept. Sarah knew something was wrong with Marcus, but his gaslighting had been so effective that she doubted her own perceptions. That's when I made a decision that would change everything. While Sarah was staying at my house and Marcus was supposedly in Los Angeles on business, I was going to find out exactly what kind of business he was really conducting. The next morning, after Sarah left for work, I drove to Marcus's office building downtown. I wasn't sure what I was hoping to accomplish, but I knew that if Marcus was lying about his whereabouts, I might be able to gather evidence of his deception. I parked across the street from his building and waited, feeling like a detective in a movie, but knowing that my daughter's emotional well-being depended on uncovering the truth. I didn't have to wait long. At 11:30 that morning, Marcus emerged from the building, but he wasn't dressed for business travel. He was wearing casual clothes and carrying a gym bag, and he looked relaxed and happy in a way that contradicted his story about stressful client presentations in Los Angeles. I followed him at a distance as he drove across town to an upscale apartment complex in Midtown. My heart sank as I watched him use a key to enter one of the buildings, clearly familiar with the location and comfortable with his access. This wasn't a business meeting or a client consultation. This was something much more personal and much more devastating for Sarah. I waited in my car for over an hour, documenting everything I observed. Marcus emerged from the apartment building at 1:15, but now accompanied by a woman I didn't recognize. She was young, probably in her late 20s, with long blonde hair and expensive clothes. They were clearly comfortable with each other, walking close together and talking intimately as they headed toward Marcus's BMW. I managed to take several photos with my phone as they embraced beside his car, and the nature of their relationship was unmistakably romantic. This wasn't a business colleague or a casual acquaintance. This was a woman Marcus was having an affair with, and he'd lied to Sarah about his whereabouts to spend time with her. My hands were shaking as I followed them to an expensive restaurant downtown where they had lunch together like a couple celebrating something special. I sat in my car in the parking lot taking more photos and trying to process what I was witnessing. Marcus wasn't just emotionally manipulating Sarah, he was actively betraying her with another woman while making her feel crazy for suspecting that something was wrong. The evidence I had gathered that day was devastating, but also liberating, because it proved that Sarah's instincts had been correct all along. Marcus was exactly the deceptive, manipulative person she had sensed him to be, and now I had concrete proof of his infidelity. But I also knew that confronting Sarah with this information would be incredibly difficult. She was already emotionally fragile from months of gaslighting, and learning about Marcus's affair might devastate her completely. I needed to approach the situation carefully, with a plan that would support Sarah through the revelation and help her understand that Marcus's betrayal was not a reflection of her worth or value as a person. That evening, when Sarah returned to my house from work,
I could see the anxiety and confusion in her eyes. She was living in a constant state of emotional tension, knowing something was wrong, but being told by her husband that her concerns were irrational and unfounded. "How was Marcus's presentation today?" I asked casually, testing whether she was aware of his actual activities. "He said it went well," Sarah replied, but her voice lacked conviction. "He's having dinner with the client tonight, so he won't be back until tomorrow afternoon." I felt a surge of anger at Marcus's continued lies, but I'd also felt hopeful that Sarah might be finally ready to hear the truth about her marriage. The evidence I had gathered was undeniable, and I had recordings that would support everything I was about to reveal. But first, I needed to prepare Sarah for what she was about to learn, and I needed to make sure she understood that discovering Marcus's betrayal was not the end of her story, but the beginning of her freedom from a destructive and manipulative relationship.
The next morning brought one of the most difficult conversations of my life. Sarah was getting ready for work, moving through my kitchen with the same nervous energy she'd carried for months. I watched her checking her phone repeatedly, waiting for messages from Marcus that would either reassure her or confirm her worst fears. I knew I couldn't let her continue living in this state of uncertainty and self-doubt any longer. "Sarah, honey, can you sit down with me for a moment before you leave? There's something important we need to discuss." She looked up from her phone with immediate concern. "Is everything okay, Mom? You look upset." I took a deep breath and chose my words carefully. "I need to tell you something about Marcus, and I need you to promise me that you'll listen to everything I have to say before you react." Sarah's face went pale. "What about Marcus? Did something happen? Is he okay?" "Marcus is fine physically, but our conversation is about his behavior and some things I've discovered. Sarah, your instincts about your marriage have been correct all along. You're not paranoid, you're not oversensitive, and you're not imagining problems that don't exist." She sat down heavily in the kitchen chair, her hands trembling slightly. "What do you mean?" I pulled out my phone and showed her the photos I'd taken the previous day. "Marcus told you he was in Los Angeles for business meetings, but yesterday I followed him to an apartment complex in Midtown, then to lunch with this woman. These photos were taken while he was supposed to be giving client presentations out of town." Sarah stared at the images on my phone screen, her face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and dawning recognition. The photos clearly showed Marcus embracing another woman, walking intimately together, sharing what was obviously a romantic meal. There was no way to interpret these images as anything other than evidence of an affair. "I don't understand," Sarah whispered, though her voice suggested she understood perfectly. "He said he had meetings. He showed me his calendar. He's been texting me updates about his presentation." "Marcus has been lying to you, sweetheart, and this isn't the first time. I've been documenting his behavior for months because I could see how much his manipulation was hurting you." I retrieved my recording device and played several of the conversations I'd captured, starting with the barbecue where Marcus had discussed adding insurance against Sarah by recording their conversations and planning to leave her with nothing if their marriage ended. Sarah listened in stunned silence as her husband's voice filled my kitchen, revealing his true feelings about their relationship and his calculated plans for protecting his assets. When I played the recording from their anniversary dinner, where Marcus had dismissed her career aspirations and treated her like an accessory to his success, Sarah began crying quietly. "I remember that night," she said. "I felt so small, so insignificant, but he told me later that I was being too sensitive, that he was just proud of being able to support me." "That's called gaslighting, honey. Marcus has been systematically undermining your confidence and making you doubt your own perceptions. Everything you've been feeling, all the anxiety and confusion, that's your mind trying to process the contradiction between what Marcus says and what he actually does." The hardest recording to share was the one where Marcus had talked about recording Sarah to use against her in a potential divorce.
When she heard his voice discussing her as if she were a problem to be managed rather than a wife to be loved, Sarah broke down completely. He doesn't love me. He never loved me. I was just convenient, wasn't I? Someone who was grateful for his attention and didn't ask too many questions. I moved to comfort her, but she pulled away, her emotions shifting from grief to anger. How long have you known? How long have you been collecting evidence about my marriage while I was living in this nightmare? Her reaction caught me off guard. I'd expected Sarah to be grateful for the evidence that validated her instincts, but instead she seemed angry with me for having it. Sarah, I only started recording Marcus because I could see how much he was hurting you. You were becoming a shadow of yourself, and I was afraid for your emotional well-being. But you didn't tell me. You let me suffer for months thinking I was losing my mind while you were secretly building a case against my husband. How is that protecting me? I realized that in my efforts to gather irrefutable evidence against Marcus, I'd inadvertently contributed to Sarah's isolation and confusion. She'd been crying out for validation and support while I'd been playing detective instead of simply believing and supporting her. You're right, I admit.
I should have trusted your instincts from the beginning, instead of feeling like I needed proof before I could help you. I was so afraid Marcus would turn you against me that I focused on building a case instead of just being your mother. Sarah wiped her eyes and looked at me with a mixture of hurt and determination. I need to confront him. I need to see his face when I tell him what I know. Honey, confronting Marcus could be dangerous. Men like him don't react well when their control is threatened. Maybe we should talk to a lawyer first, or at least make sure you have a safety plan. But Sarah was already reaching for her phone. He's supposed to come home this afternoon. I'm going to be there waiting for him with printouts of these photos and a recording of his voice planning to destroy me. I want to see him try to gaslight his way out of this. I could see the fire returning to Sarah's eyes for the first time in months, and while I was proud of her strength, I was also concerned about her safety. Marcus had already proven himself to be manipulative and calculating, and cornering him with evidence of his affairs might provoke an unpredictable reaction. If you're determined to confront him, then I'm going with you, and I think we should have someone else present as a witness, someone Marcus won't expect. Sarah considered this for a moment, then nodded. Actually, I have a better idea. Marcus always records important conversations now, supposedly for business purposes. If he's going to document our marriage, then I'm going to document its end. That afternoon, we drove to Sarah and Marcus's house together. Sarah had called in sick to work, claiming a family emergency, which wasn't entirely untrue. We arrived an hour before Marcus was scheduled to return from his fake business trip, giving us time to prepare for what would undoubtedly be a confrontational conversation. Sarah moved through the house she'd once loved with new eyes, seeing it now as the stage for Marcus's deception, rather than the symbol of their successful marriage. She gathered important documents from their shared files, including financial records and insurance policies, and placed them in a bag she could take with her if the confrontation went badly. I can't believe I never questioned how he could afford all this, Sarah said, looking around their expensively furnished living room. His salary is good, but not good enough for $1 million house and a luxury lifestyle. I wonder if his family money stories are as fictional as his business trips. We set up my recording device in the living room, concealed but positioned to capture clear audio of whatever conversation was about to unfold. Sarah also activated the voice recorder on her phone as backup. If Marcus wanted to document their marriage, he was about to get more documentation than he'd bargained for. At 4:30, we heard Marcus's BMW pull into the driveway. Sarah positioned herself in the living room while I waited in the kitchen, close enough to intervene if necessary, but far enough away to give them privacy for their confrontation. My heart was pounding as I heard Marcus's key on the front door, followed by his cheerful voice calling out his usual greeting. "Sarah, honey, I'm home. The presentation went amazing. I think we're going to land the biggest client in the firm's history." "That's interesting," Sarah replied, her voice steady and cold. "Tell me more about this presentation. Where exactly did it take place?" I could hear the change in Marcus's tone immediately. "What do you mean?"
I told you it was at the client's headquarters in Los Angeles. Why are you asking? Because I have some interesting photos here that suggest you weren't in Los Angeles at all yesterday. In fact, you seem to have been very busy right here in Sacramento. The silence that followed was deafening. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice had shifted from confused to defensive. Sarah, what are you talking about? What photos? These photos, Sarah said, and I could hear her moving papers around. Photos of you with a blonde woman at an apartment complex in Midtown. Photos of you having lunch together at Bistro 33. Photos of you kissing her beside your car. Those photos don't prove anything, Marcus said quickly, but his voice was strained. That was a work colleague. We were discussing sensitive client information in a private setting. The embrace was just a friendly goodbye. Really? Because I also have some interesting audio recordings here. Would you like to hear them?
I heard the sound of my recording device playing, and Marcus's own voice filled the house as he discussed getting insurance against Sarah by recording their conversations and leaving her with nothing in a divorce. The silence that followed was even longer this time. When Marcus spoke again, his tone had changed completely. Gone was the defensive confusion, replaced by cold calculation. Where did you get these recordings, Sarah? Have you been spying on me? No, Marcus, I haven't been spying on you, but someone who cares about me has been documenting your behavior because they could see what you were doing to me. Your mother, Marcus said, and I could hear the fury in his voice. I knew that woman was trouble from the beginning. She's been poisoning you against me, filling your head with paranoid thoughts, convincing you to question everything about our marriage. My mother didn't convince me of anything, Sarah shot back. My mother just provided evidence for what I already knew in my heart. You've been lying to me, manipulating me, and cheating on me while telling me I was crazy for suspecting it. Sarah, you're overreacting. One indiscretion doesn't invalidate our entire marriage. I made a mistake, but it didn't mean anything. I love you, and I want to work this out. I felt sick listening to Marcus minimize his betrayal as one indiscretion and a mistake, as if accidentally bumping into someone in a hallway was equivalent to conducting a full-blown affair while lying about business trips. One indiscretion? Sarah's voice was rising. Marcus, you've been systematically destroying my self-confidence for months. You've been planning to divorce me and leave me with nothing. You've been having an affair while making me feel crazy for suspecting it. This isn't one mistake. This is who you are. Fine, Marcus said, and his voice turned ice cold. If you want to throw away our marriage over some photos and out-of-context recordings, that's your choice. But you should understand what you're giving up. This house, this lifestyle, the financial security I've provided for you, all of that goes away if you leave me. I never needed your money, Marcus. I had a life and a career before I met you, and I'll have one after you're gone. Will you? Because I seem to remember you crying to your mother about how you couldn't afford basic expenses after your first divorce. You were pathetic and desperate when I found you, and that's exactly what you'll be again when I'm done with you. The cruelty in Marcus's voice was stunning. He'd dropped all pretense of being a loving husband and revealed the manipulative, vindictive person he'd always been beneath his charming facade. Are you threatening me? Sarah asked, and I could hear both fear and anger in her voice. I'm not threatening you, I'm promising you. If you want to destroy our marriage based on your mother's interference and your own paranoid suspicions, then you'll discover exactly what that choice costs. I have lawyers, Sarah, good lawyers, who specialize in protecting men from vindictive ex-wives who try to take what they haven't earned. That's when I decided I'd heard enough. I walked into the living room where Sarah was standing with printed photos spread across the coffee table, and Marcus was looming over her in what was clearly an intimidation tactic. "Hello, Marcus," I said calmly. "I see you're finally showing Sarah who you really are."
Marcus spun around to face me, his face flush with anger. You! I should have known you were behind this. You've been sabotaging my marriage from the beginning, turning Sarah against me with your poisonous suggestions and paranoid theories. Actually, Marcus, I've been documenting your behavior because I care about my daughter's well-being. And everything I've recorded proves that Sarah's instincts about you have been correct all along. You've been recording me without my consent. That's illegal. No, Marcus, it's not illegal. In California, recording conversations is legal as long as one party consents. And since I was present for every conversation I recorded, I was that consenting party. I've also documented your affair, your lies about business trips, and your plans to financially destroy Sarah in a divorce. Marcus's composure was cracking. You manipulative old woman. You couldn't stand to see Sarah happy, so you set out to destroy the best thing that ever happened to her. The best thing that ever happened to her?
I laughed bitterly. Marcus, you've spent the past year systematically undermining her confidence, isolating her from support systems, lying about your activities, and cheating on her with other women. You've been gaslighting her so effectively that she thought she was losing her mind. How exactly is that the best thing that ever happened to her? I gave her a lifestyle she could never afford on her own. I gave her status, security, and a beautiful home. She was nobody before she met me, and she'll be nobody again when I'm finished with her. Sarah stepped forward, her voice stronger than I'd heard it in months. You know what, Marcus? You're right about one thing. I was nobody when I met you. I was so insecure and desperate for love that I convinced myself that being treated like a pretty accessory was the same as being cherished as a partner. But I'm not that person anymore. No, you're not, Marcus sneered. Now you're a paranoid, suspicious woman who throws away a good marriage because she can't handle her husband having normal social interactions with colleagues. Normal social interactions? Sarah picked up one of the photos showing Marcus kissing his affair partner. Is this a normal social interaction, Marcus? Is lying about business trips normal? Is planning to record your wife to use against her in divorce proceedings normal? Marcus looked at the photo, and for a moment, his mask slipped completely. Instead of denial or manipulation, what I saw in his face was pure contempt for Sarah, as if she were an inconvenience he was tired of managing. You know what your problem is, Sarah? You're ungrateful. I elevated you from your pathetic little life into something extraordinary, and instead of appreciating what I've given you, you focus on meaningless details that have nothing to do with our marriage. Meaningless details? Sarah's voice was incredulous. You're having an affair, Marcus. You're lying to me constantly. You're planning to divorce me and leave me with nothing. These aren't meaningless details. They're fundamental betrayals of our marriage vows. Marriage vows? Marcus scoffed. Sarah, marriage is a business arrangement. You provide me with companionship and social status, and I provide you with financial security and lifestyle enhancement. The problem is that you've stopped holding up your end of the bargain. I watched Sarah's face as Marcus revealed his true view of their marriage, and I could see the final pieces of her illusions falling away. She'd married a man who saw her as an employee rather than a partner, an acquisition rather than a beloved wife. You're right, Sarah said quietly. I have stopped holding up my end of the bargain. I've stopped being grateful for being treated like a possession. I've stopped pretending that financial security is more important than emotional respect. I've stopped accepting that being provided for means I should tolerate being lied to and cheated on. Marcus's face darkened. Fine. If that's how you want to play this, then let's talk about what happens next. You want a divorce? You'll get one, but you'll discover that everything you think you're entitled to belongs to me. This house, the cars, the bank accounts, even your precious jewelry. It's all in my name, because I'm the one who earned it. Actually, Marcus, I interjected, that's where your planning might have a few gaps. Both Sarah and Marcus turned to look at me. What do you mean? Sarah asked.
I pulled out my phone and showed them a recording app I'd been running throughout their entire confrontation. I mean that Marcus has just provided us with a detailed confession of his motivations, his affairs, and his intentions to financially abuse Sarah in divorce proceedings, all of which will be very interesting to any judge who has to decide on property division and alimony. Marcus's face went white. You can't use that recording. This is my house, and I didn't consent to being recorded here. Actually, Marcus, Sarah lives here too, which means she has the legal right to consent to recordings in her own home. And since she's been present for this entire conversation, her consent makes this recording completely legal.
The implications of what I was saying began to sink in for Marcus. He'd just spent 20 minutes confessing to adultery, financial manipulation, and plans to abuse the legal system to punish Sarah for leaving him. All of it was now documented on a recording that could be used in divorce proceedings. You planned this, Marcus said, his voice low and dangerous. Both of you planned this ambush. We planned to confront you with evidence of your behavior, Sarah said. We didn't plan for you to confess to additional crimes and provide us with even more evidence of your character. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him trying to calculate his options. When he spoke again, his voice had shifted back to the charming tone he'd used during their courtship, the manipulative warmth he deployed when he needed to regain control. Sarah, honey, we're both upset right now. We're saying things we don't mean, making decisions based on emotion rather than logic. Why don't we take some time to cool down and discuss this rationally when we're both thinking more clearly? But Sarah wasn't falling for his manipulation anymore. There's nothing to discuss, Marcus. I want a divorce. I want you to move out of this house while we work out the legal details. And I want you to stop contacting me directly. All communication should go through lawyers from now on. Sarah, you're making a huge mistake. You're throwing away a good marriage because of your mother's interference and your own insecurities. If you change your mind later, don't expect me to take you back. I won't change my mind, Sarah said firmly, because now I know exactly who you are, and I know exactly what I'm worth. I'm worth more than being lied to, more than being cheated on, and more than being treated like a possession rather than a person. Marcus looked back and forth between Sarah and me, and I could see him realizing that his usual manipulation tactics weren't working. The evidence against him was too overwhelming, and Sarah's newfound strength was too solid for him to shake. Fine, he said finally, but you'll regret this, Sarah. Both of you will regret destroying the best thing that ever happened to this family. The best thing that happened to this family, I said, is Sarah finding the strength to recognize that she deserves better than what you were giving her. Marcus gathered a few personal items and left the house that evening, but not before making several more attempts to manipulate Sarah into changing her mind. He tried guilt, anger, threats, and even crocodile tears. But Sarah remained firm in her decision. The woman who'd been questioning her own sanity just days earlier was now calmly and confidently ending a marriage that had been destroying her emotional well-being. After Marcus left, Sarah and I sat in her living room surrounded by the evidence of his betrayal. Photos, recordings, and financial documents that painted a clear picture of a man who'd never valued her as anything more than an attractive accessory to his successful image. I feel like I'm waking up from a bad dream, Sarah said. For months, I thought I was losing my mind. I thought I was paranoid and oversensitive and ungrateful for the life Marcus had given me. But I wasn't crazy at all, was I? No, honey, you weren't crazy. You were responding normally to abnormal treatment. Marcus was systematically manipulating your reality, and your mind was trying to process the contradiction between what he said and what he did. How did I let it get so bad? How did I lose myself so completely that I couldn't trust my own perceptions? I took Sarah's hand and looked into her eyes. Because you loved him, and you wanted to believe the best about the man you'd married. Because he was skilled at manipulation and experienced at making women doubt themselves. Because you'd been hurt before, and you were afraid of losing another relationship. I'm scared, Sarah admitted.
not of being alone, but of facing the legal battle that's coming. Marcus meant what he said about his lawyers and trying to leave me with nothing. That's where Marcus made a crucial mistake, I said. He assumed that you'd be fighting this battle alone, the way you fought your first divorce. But this time, you have evidence. You have recordings of his own admissions, and you have people who believe in you and support you. Over the next several weeks, the extent of Marcus's deception became even clearer. The apartment where I'd seen him with his affair partner turned out to be a place he'd been renting for over 8 months, far longer than his recent claims about work stress and one-time indiscretions. Financial records revealed that he'd been spending significant amounts of money on expensive gifts and travel that were never mentioned to Sarah. Most disturbing of all, Sarah discovered that Marcus had indeed been recording their private conversations, just as he threatened to do so. But his recordings revealed more about his own manipulative tactics than about any supposed irrationality on Sarah's part. He'd been documenting his own gaslighting techniques, creating a record of how he'd systematically undermined her confidence and questioned her perceptions.
The divorce proceedings were contentious, exactly as Marcus had promised they would be. His lawyers tried every tactic to portray Sarah as an unstable, paranoid woman who'd been influenced by her meddling mother to destroy a good marriage. They attempted to characterize my recordings as evidence of a conspiracy against Marcus rather than documentation of his abusive behavior. But the evidence we'd gathered was too overwhelming for their narrative to hold up. Marcus's own recorded admissions about his affairs, his financial manipulation plans, and his view of marriage as a business transaction contradicted every argument his lawyers made about his character and intentions. The recordings also revealed the calculated nature of his psychological abuse. This wasn't a man who'd made mistakes in a difficult marriage. This was someone who deliberately set out to control and diminish his wife while positioning himself to discard her when she was no longer useful to his image. 6 months after our confrontation in Sarah's living room, the divorce was finalized. Sarah received a significant settlement that reflected both her contributions to the marriage and Marcus's documented attempts to hide assets and manipulate the legal process. More importantly, she'd regained her sense of self-worth and her trust in her own perceptions. The blonde woman from the apartment turned out to be one of several affairs Marcus had been conducting during his marriage to Sarah. When she learned about his deceptions, she provided additional testimony about his patterns of lying and manipulation. Marcus's carefully constructed image as a successful, faithful husband crumbled under the weight of evidence from multiple sources. But the most satisfying moment came when Sarah started her new life in a smaller apartment that she'd chosen and decorated herself. Watching her move through her own space with confidence and joy, seeing her rebuild friendships that Marcus had subtly discouraged, and witnessing her return to the career ambitions he'd dismissed was worth every uncomfortable moment of the investigation and confrontation process. "I keep thinking about that recording device Marcus gave me at the beginning," Sarah told me one evening as we had dinner in her new kitchen. "He wanted to use it to prove that I was the problem in our marriage, but instead, it became the symbol of how he'd been manipulating my reality all along." "What do you mean?" I asked. "He was so confident that recording our conversations would prove I was irrational and paranoid. But what it actually proved was that my instincts were correct, that my perceptions were accurate, and that the problem was never me at all." That's when I realized the full irony of what had happened. Marcus had started this whole mess by threatening to record Sarah to use against her in a potential divorce. But our recordings of his behavior had ended up being the evidence that protected Sarah and exposed his true character. The man who'd tried to document his wife's supposed irrationality had instead documented his own manipulation, deception, and emotional abuse. His plan to control the narrative had backfired completely, providing Sarah with exactly the evidence she needed to escape his control and rebuild her life. 2 years later, I'm sitting in Sarah's new apartment, watching her prepare for a date with a kind man she met through her work at the medical center. She's glowing with a confidence I haven't seen since before she married Marcus, and it fills my heart with joy to see her trusting her own judgment again. The transformation didn't happen overnight. Those first few months after the divorce were incredibly difficult for Sarah.
She struggled with doubt, wondering if she'd made the right decision, especially when Marcus's friends and colleagues painted her as the vindictive ex-wife who destroyed a good man's reputation with false accusations. But the evidence we'd gathered spoke for itself. When word spread about the recordings and the proof of Marcus's multiple affairs, his carefully constructed reputation began crumbling. Other women came forward with similar stories of his manipulative behavior in previous relationships. His affair partner from the Midtown apartment wasn't his first extramarital relationship, just the most recent in a long pattern of deception. The most revealing discovery came when Sarah's divorce attorney uncovered Marcus's financial records during the discovery process. The family money he'd always bragged about turned out to be largely fictional. His expensive lifestyle was funded through credit cards and loans secured against inflated property values. The Victorian house that was supposed to be a gift from his wealthy parents was actually mortgaged to the maximum, with payments he could barely afford on his actual salary. Marcus had been living a complete lie, not just about his faithfulness, but about his entire financial situation. He'd married Sarah partly because he needed someone to help maintain the illusion of success, while he struggled to keep up with the lifestyle he'd created to impress clients and colleagues. When this information came to light during the divorce proceedings, Marcus's attempts to portray himself as the successful provider being victimized by a gold-digging ex-wife fell apart completely. The judge was particularly unimpressed with the recordings of Marcus discussing his plans to leave Sarah with nothing while admitting that she'd brought stability and respectability to his chaotic life. Sarah ultimately received a settlement that included half the equity in their house, despite Marcus's claims that everything belongs to him. More importantly, she discovered that her own financial contributions to their marriage had been significantly more substantial than she'd realized. Her steady income and excellent credit had made many of Marcus's business ventures possible, and the court recognized her as an equal partner rather than a dependent spouse. But beyond the financial aspects of the divorce, what mattered most was watching Sarah rebuild her sense of self-worth. She started therapy to process the emotional manipulation she'd endured, learning to recognize gaslighting techniques and trust her own perceptions again. The therapist helped her understand that her instincts about Marcus had been accurate all along, and that his systematic undermining of her confidence had been a deliberate strategy to maintain control. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Sarah received an unexpected phone call from Detective Rodriguez with the Sacramento Police Department. Marcus had been arrested for financial fraud related to his investment business. Several clients had filed complaints alleging that he'd misrepresented investment opportunities and mishandled their money for personal use. The investigation revealed that Marcus's pattern of deception extended far beyond his personal relationships into his professional life. He'd been using client funds to maintain his expensive lifestyle while providing falsified reports about investment performance. Some of his elderly clients had lost their entire retirement savings to his schemes. "I feel terrible for those people," Sarah told me when she shared the news about Marcus's arrest, "but I also feel validated. Everyone kept telling me I was paranoid for not trusting him, but my instincts were picking up on something real." The fraud charges explained many of the suspicious behaviors I documented in my recordings. His frequent business calls and client meetings had often been attempts to manage his illegal activities and keep his clients from discovering their losses. His stress about money and his desperate need to maintain appearances had driven him to increasingly risky and illegal behavior. When Marcus was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison for securities fraud, Sarah felt a complex mixture of emotions. She was relieved that her victims would receive some measure of justice, but she also felt sadness for the man she'd once loved, even though that man had turned out to be largely fictional.
"I keep thinking about our wedding day," she told me. "He seemed so genuine when he promised to love and cherish me. Was any of it real, or was I just another mark in his long-term con game?" I've thought about that question many times over the past 2 years. I believe Marcus was capable of genuine emotion, but only as it served his own needs. He probably did feel something like love for Sarah, but it was the love of possession rather than partnership. He valued her for what she provided to his image and lifestyle rather than for who she was as a person. The recordings I made during their marriage revealed a man who saw relationships as transactions to be managed rather than connections to be nurtured. Even his expressions of love were calculated to maintain control and compliance rather than to build intimacy and trust. Sarah's recovery process taught me valuable lessons about supporting someone who's been emotionally manipulated. In my eagerness to protect her with evidence and documentation, I had initially overlooked her need for simple validation and emotional support. She didn't need me to prove that Marcus was bad for her. She needed me to believe her when she said something felt wrong. The recordings and photographs I gathered were ultimately helpful in the legal proceedings, but what Sarah needed most was someone who trusted her instincts and supported her decisions without requiring proof or justification. Learning to be that kind of support system for her strengthened our relationship in ways that extended far beyond the crisis with Marcus. Today, Sarah works as a practice manager at a large medical center, using the administrative skills she developed before her marriage to Marcus. She's respected by her colleagues, valued for her competence and judgment, and financially independent in a way that makes her proud of her own accomplishments. She's been dating Tom, a radiologic technologist from her workplace, for about 8 months now. Their relationship is built on mutual respect and open communication, a stark contrast to the manipulation and control that characterized her marriage to Marcus. Tom encourages Sarah's career ambitions, values her opinions, and treats her as an equal partner rather than an accessory to his own success. Watching Sarah with Tom has been healing for both of us. She's learned to trust her instincts about people again, while I've learned to support her choices without feeling the need to investigate and document everything about her relationships. We both understand now that love shouldn't require evidence files and surveillance equipment to verify its authenticity. The experience with Marcus also changed my perspective on my role as Sarah's mother. I'd spent so much energy trying to protect her from making mistakes that I'd sometimes forgotten to simply trust her judgment and offer unconditional support. Learning to balance protective instincts with respect for her autonomy has made our relationship stronger and more honest. Last month, Sarah asked me to help her clean out the storage unit where she'd kept items from her marriage to Marcus. As we sorted through photo albums and wedding mementos, she found the small recording device that had started this whole story, the one Marcus had given her to document their conversations. "I should probably throw this away," she said, holding the device in her palm. "Or keep it as a reminder," I suggested. "Not of what Marcus did to you, but of how strong you became when you decided to trust yourself instead of his version of reality." Sarah smiled and slipped the device into her pocket. "You know what the strangest part is? Marcus thought he was so clever planning to record me to prove I was irrational, but in the end, all the recordings just proved that I was seeing him clearly while he was lying to himself about who he really was." That's the irony that still amazes me about this whole situation. Marcus spent so much energy trying to control the narrative about their marriage that he forgot the most important truth. Reality has a way of revealing itself regardless of how skillfully someone tries to manipulate it. The last I heard about Marcus, he was serving his sentence at a federal facility in Central California. His financial advisor license was permanently revoked, and he'll likely never work in the financial industry again. The beautiful Victorian house was sold to pay restitution to his defrauded clients, and his reputation in Sacramento's business community was completely destroyed. Sarah occasionally receives letters from Marcus in prison attempting to restart the relationship or asking for financial support. She doesn't respond to these communications, having learned that engaging with manipulative people only provides them with opportunities to resume their control tactics. "I feel sorry for him sometimes," Sarah told me recently. "Not because he's in prison, but because he spent so much energy trying to be someone he wasn't that he never figured out who he actually was or what would genuinely make him happy." That observation captures something profound about Marcus's character. He was so invested in maintaining facades and controlling other people's perceptions that he lost touch with his own authentic self. His life became an elaborate performance designed to impress others rather than a genuine expression of his values and desires. For Sarah and I, the experience taught us that authentic relationships are built on truth rather than illusion, on trust rather than control, and on mutual respect rather than manipulation.
The recordings I made of Marcus's behavior were valuable evidence in legal proceedings, but the real victory was Sarah's decision to trust her own perceptions and demand the respect she deserved. Tonight, as Sarah heads out for dinner with Tom, adjusting her earrings in the mirror and humming softly to herself, I'm struck by how different she looks compared to those dark months when Marcus was systematically undermining her confidence. She moves with purpose and joy, secure in her own worth and excited about her future. The recording device that Marcus intended to use as a weapon against Sarah ultimately became the tool that set her free. Sometimes the people who try hardest to control the story end up providing the evidence that exposes the truth they were trying to hide. Sarah learned that she didn't need expensive clothes or a prestigious address to be valuable. She didn't need a husband's financial support to be secure. She didn't need to sacrifice her instincts and perceptions to maintain a relationship. Most importantly, she learned that her own judgment was trustworthy and that people who truly loved her would never ask her to doubt herself. Tonight, as she heads out for dinner with Tom, a man who values her opinions and encourages her dreams, Sarah carries herself with the confidence of someone who knows exactly what she's worth. And that's a recording worth keeping forever. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.